Hello everyone, Sakuya here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. We are back with our series of I Watched It So That You Didn't Have To with Queen Cleopatra for the second episode. Because actually last time the first episode was very positively received. Or rather, my episode analyzing it, I guess, was positively received. The actual episode itself was not positively received at all. It's been a bit of a problem that has been further developing for Netflix, to the point that not only are they getting sued, but apparently there are multiple lawsuits coming out of Egypt directed toward this thing. Like, Egypt itself is suing Netflix over this documentary. But either way, you want to know what's wrong with it? So okay, you know what, let's jump in. Because the second episode, oh well, that's where all the drama happens. The opening scene of the second episode is Queen Cleopatra giving birth to Caesarion. This being the son that she would have with Julius Caesar, and subsequently the heir to her throne, and what she had hoped would also be a heir to Rome, basically. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with the scene of this, but the words that they're using to describe over this, again, it's just this documentary can't seem to help itself. It says from the beginning that this is the baby, the destined child that could unite the two most powerful nations on Earth. The two most powerful nations on Earth. Are you kidding me? This is another one of those cases where they're playing up the strength of Egypt and also Cleopatra and trying to make them seem way more powerful than they actually were, when they just talked about in the previous episode about how weak Egypt was at this time and how it was subservient to Rome. Rome and Egypt are not the two most powerful states on Earth. Rome is the most powerful state on Earth, at least in the West. The most powerful state on Earth on the other side of the world is the Han Dynasty Chinese Empire, not Egypt. Hell, the only other power that was in the area that could actually compete with Rome, and did for many years, was the Parthian Empire. Cleopatra, during this time, was trying to salvage as much as she possibly could out of her nation. She was trying to fix it to the best of her ability, which was a lot. She did have a lot of ability, but simultaneously, they were crippled by drought. They were crippled by debt. And internal politics, as they will talk about in this episode itself, meant that there was a constant fear of civil war. It was not exactly a stable society during this time. It wasn't the most powerful. It's such a weird and unnecessary flex. I don't get why, because it's not true. But okay, everyone is happy. We got the baby. Oh, smiles all around. Her brother husband, Ptolemy the 13th, ends up dying because he falls off his boat in golden armor. And they mention the possible trouble that is going to be coming with Arsinoe, her sister. All standard stuff filled with a little bit of melodrama here, but we'll get into this whole thing with Arsinoe in a second. The thing that you noticed immediately after is they start talking about more stuff with Rome, and you start to see more depictions of the military. And again, the armor, the freaking armor. What is with the leather freaking armor? I don't get it. Why? Almost every Roman soldier that you see depicted in this thing is equipped with like a leather cuirass that it doesn't make sense. They're dressed up like a costume of a Roman soldier that you would see at a Halloween party store, like a Spirit Halloween. But then just a couple seconds after this, you end up seeing something else. Okay, here's all the other troops that are marching in formation with one another. And then what the hell is this? Look at all this variance of armor. What? At least they don't have the arm braces that are on. At least there's that. But then this guy has an entire lorica manica. This is so confusing. By the time in the Roman Republic, the armor for legions were standardized. Yes, there were some individuals that they purchased their own armor, but the standard armor that was being produced for the soldiers at this time was pretty much the lorica hamada, what it is that you can see these guys wearing. But then intermixed with that, within the same unit, you're also simultaneously seeing lorica segmentata, which, okay, yeah, lorica segmentata may have started to exist in this time, because this is what, 46 BC, and lorica segmentata is the classic armor that you're thinking of the early Roman imperial period. So it did exist in the end of the Republic around this time, but our first evidence of it being worn is somewhere around like 9 or 10 BC. It may have been worn earlier, there may be examples of it, but to depict soldiers in the Lorica Segmentata. You can see it here, you can see it down here. This guy over here, I'm pretty sure is just wearing freaking leather. It seems so incredibly weird that it's mixed in within the same unit. What happened to the standardization of the Legion? What is it? It looks like a bunch of guys wearing Roman Legionnaire costumes were asked to come to the studio and film a set for their Roman marching scene. But okay, moving on, there's supposed to be a triumph in Rome. They're moving on. Wait, no. Back to armor. Skip on through this because all of a sudden, again, it switches to what looks like definitive Imperial Roman armor way before it was ever supposed to. Like, what is this? What is it? What is with the full setup that looks like it belongs in the 1st century AD? This scene right here genuinely looks like it's 100 years too early. Like, if they just kept it uniform, I don't get why that's not so hard. If they had just kept the scenes uniform with Lorica Hamada or something like that, I would be fine with it. Hell, if you wanted to take it and say all Lorica Segmentata, fine. I guess it's still iffy but weird, but it's the sheer amount of variance that bothers me there. Anyway, Caesar goes on and has a triumph. Apparently the people of Rome are appalled that a 17-year-old girl, Arsinoe, is being marched through the street. They don't want her to die. And so Caesar then goes back on his promise with Cleopatra and ends up not executing Arsinoe. But since this is how it goes down, it makes the entire scene from the previous episode at the end with the sexual tension and implied drama between Caesar and Arsinoe, it makes that entire sequence pointless. In case this is the first episode that you're watching, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's this one right here where she falls while going down into the prison ship and falls into the arm of Caesar. He kind of like caresses her side and they look up at each other and just look all smoky in the eyes together. It's just such a completely dumb added flair. And I commented on that in the previous episode. And when we then see it in the next episode that they're like, oh yeah, no, the people of Rome did not want her executed, then why do this? Why somewhat seem to imply that they slept together? Here's another weird point, but a little nitpicky again for the whole Roman thing. Why is the blade slung across the body here on the left side? I mean, I guess maybe the soldier could be left-handed, but this is again a bit odd because Roman soldiers typically carried their blades on the same side that their dominant hand, or like the right hand, was. This being because when you're holding out your shield with your left hand, you're able to simultaneously pull up your blade from its position on your hip on your right side, and since it's a short sword, flip it to be able to use. If you're using a shield, having to then pull your blade from across your body and potentially hitting your own shield trying to get it out while you're protecting yourself, it's just something that if a barbarian crushes into you with the full might of his force and your shield is pressed against your body, you won't be able to draw your blade. Little nitpicky, but it just feels like, why not just have it reversed? Simple little things that could be done. But okay, now they go and talk about in this just how powerful Rome is. If you remember that previous map where it was showing Rome and it was showing the great state of Egypt and what it was at the time, and I showed you that actual map of what the Roman Empire was at this point, now they go and are actually showing just how powerful it actually was, which makes the previous episode when they were utilizing the map just kind of, again, more disingenuous and pointless. Why try to talk Rome up now? Then talk about Caesar, how he was a hero to the people, how Cleopatra goes to Rome to show off her son. Anyway, Cleopatra gets mad at Caesar because Caesar did not have Arsinoe executed. The entire scene that they have in here of their conversation surrounding it is, again, it's all just made up melodrama just to fill the gap in between the academics going and talking about things. But then there's this line regarding their relationship where they say, given the fluidity of sexuality in ancient Egypt, Julius Caesar is probably not Cleopatra's first sexual partner. Okay, first off in the case, you're just going to throw out the whole thing about sexual fluidity in ancient Egypt, just like from the beginning, just to throw that out there, no other explanation. Seems a little odd. And then there's the use of the word probably, again, just like what we discussed in the previous episode. Again, using probably, we imagine, could have. So many times that is used in these episodes, and it's infuriating just from the sheer amount of what if that is thrown into the pot. Like, Shelley, my dear, you are saying that Julius Caesar was probably not her first sexual partner. Maybe that is the case. We don't know. Does that line sound very familiar? I'm not sure. But the funny thing is, prior to meeting Julius Caesar, for a while before, she was married to her brother, who I would kind of have to assume that they did need to consummate the marriage. Not exactly a pleasant thought to have, but yeah, given the fact that she was already married by the time that she met Julius Caesar, even though she didn't have a good relationship with her brother. You know, there was the whole coup attempt to get rid of her and all that kind of thing. That is arguably the biggest possibility. And then even after that, you don't know these things. You don't know that she had other partners or anything. I know it's a really weird thing to be nitpicky on, but it seems weird that they would bring it up in the first place about Cleopatra's possible other sexual partners before Julius Caesar. Why? You have no information to work off of here whatsoever. And of course, because this is Netflix with it here, it has to have a very steamy scene where all the sexy stuff is happening. They then go on to talk about how Julius Caesar has never met a woman like Cleopatra, and that he would more than likely have been overwhelmed by her because she was a woman in possession of her own sexuality and identity, which, to be fair, they're playing it up, but this is true to a degree. Roman women at this time, and they draw the comparisons between Egyptian women and Roman women, there were very stark differences, as Rome was a very patriarchal society in which women did not have nearly the same level of rights as the men did to be able to do things. And so seeing the power, the wisdom, the intelligence of Cleopatra, this is something that, from what we can tell, really did impress and enamor Julius Caesar. But to add all this stuff and be like, oh, he would be overwhelmed by her. Would he? We're talking about a man who has been a political and military powerhouse for years. He has already been leading men. He has been sleeping with women. He has been doing all of these things prior to this. And so, yes, I understand being impressed and enamored and even enraptured, but to be overwhelmed, because from this scene of being overwhelmed by this woman, they then go on to talk about later on in the episode about how Cleopatra is doing all of these things to influence Caesar and policy and whatnot within Rome, as though the guiding developments behind Rome during this period, in the late Republican period before it transitioned to the imperial power, the implication that they're giving is that it was Cleopatra that was making this happen with Caesar. Anyway, so she's staying in the villa, of course. The Roman Republic has seen her, especially the elite are disgusted by her. They do not like the idea of this foreign queen that is in their midst, that is having a open bigamist relationship with one of their leaders, who is actually the most powerful man in Rome, that the Senate is simultaneously already more hostile towards. And so it's during this whole party scene that there's another line where they say something along the lines of, oh, the Roman Republic and these men, and oh, they really lean hard into the men aspect, real hard with this patriarchal society, which, to be fair, it was, but just their phrasing of it for looking down upon it is just so incredibly dumb. But the reason why they're saying that they don't like Cleopatra is because she's different. She wasn't doing what a woman was supposed to. Well, maybe to a degree, but the bigger aspect was that you had a foreign queen that was in an open, illegitimate relationship, a bigamist relationship in a monogamous society in Rome. Romans did not have multiple wives. That wasn't a thing. So the fact that Julius Caesar had an established Roman wife in the upper class of society, and he wasn't having relations with a slave, he was having relations with a queen. There were genuine fears that Julius Caesar was going to want to become a king himself, and that he was flaunting the Roman traditionalists in front of their very eyes. And no, seriously, there's this whole scene afterwards with Cicero, and they're all at this party, and he puts in some really dumb line, apparently, about how wonderful Cleopatra and glorious she is as a representation of Egypt itself, ripe and ready for plucking. Like this weird kind of sexual, creepy, almost kind of rapey thing that is, it's so weird and dumb. It is dumb. But of course, they had to make Cicero, the guy who is the traditionalist who wants to protect Roman values, an apparent pig, pretty much. And they do this specifically to set it up in the next few seconds so that Cleopatra can come back with a strong girl boss retort. Ripe and ready for the plucking? Is this the respect that Rome offers its women? Cicero, even if I was, one wonders if you could even find your tool, basically making, a dick joke back at him, that his thing wouldn't work. Yeah, girl boss moment. What the absolute hell? All of the lines that go into the scene are just made up, and the entire thing comes across as so incredibly cringy rather than clever and powerful girl boss moment, which I know is the scene that they were trying to go for. There's even a line in it where she says, oh, there is no Rome without Egypt, because there's a whole scene about, oh, Egypt is this ancient decaying power and Rome is the new great power. And she's like, oh yeah, there is no Rome without Egypt because there is no future without a past. As though implying from this that the reason why Rome is as powerful as it is because of Egypt in the first place, which is not true. Egypt, after being incorporated into the empire, would end up becoming the breadbasket of the empire, which in turn would allow for its cities to grow even greater and allow the city of Rome to reach 1 million people. This is true. So that statement, again, as I believe I discussed in the trailer, that is somewhat true later on to a degree, but the way that they're phrasing it in here and placing it just makes no sense immediately afterwards. Caesar Raven's like, are you seriously suggesting that we would not have existed without you? And she goes, I'll leave you to ponder that. Wait, what? If you're going to make a statement like that, of course you have to at least kind of back it up, but I think even for this Netflix documentary, that would be adding in so much more unnecessary dialogue that would just dig them into a deeper hole. And again, it doesn't make sense because the existence of Egypt itself does not then lead credence to the rise of Rome. The existence of Egypt has no relation to Rome. And Caesar goes, finally, a guest who can have some good conversation. There was no good conversation during the scene, damn it. Anyway, the next scene is that they're going on and talking about Caesar's power in Rome and how he becomes dictator. And that apparently the way that this happened, according to the documentary, is that after the war in Alexandria and he returned home in triumph, the Senate of Rome were so grateful to him that they declared him dictator. No, that is not how that happened at all. He declared himself to be dictator. He made it happen through his political connections and forcefulness. It wasn't like the Senate was on his side and loved him. No, absolutely not. He was just so incredibly powerful that he was almost untouchable at that point. So that whole thing is just dumb. Next up, we're talking about how Cleopatra in this is working with Caesar on the different projects in Rome, how they're working together to build a library and whatnot. And okay, there's some little cool interaction here. That's fine, it's fine. But then they go on to say that it is during this time that they would adopt the Julian calendar because, Egypt had this whole calendar that they've been using for thousands of years with 365 days where it's 12 30-day months followed by a 5-day mini month, hence 365 days because they knew that. And so Julius Caesar, under Cleopatra's influence, Caesar goes and adopts his own calendar that also has 365 days, except no, it doesn't, because this is the Julian calendar and this does not happen under the direction of Cleopatra, but rather under a guy that is by the name of Sosigenes. I don't know why they're heavily implying that it was Cleopatra that was insisting upon this thing with the whole calendar change, because that wasn't the case. Julius Caesar had a Greek advisor from Alexandria in Egypt by the name of Sosigenes, that he was this Greek astronomer and mathematician from an Alexandrian school that we don't really know much about. But what we do know is that he is the main astronomer who would help Julius Caesar with his reform of the Roman lunar calendar. Although his role in the reform is not very clear, this information comes from Plutarch, which simply states, without mentioning any names, that Caesar consulted the very best philosophers and mathematicians before making an improved calendar of his own, and that Pliny says that it is during Caesar's dictatorship that Sosigenes would help him bring the years back into conformity with the sun. So it's not Cleopatra that is pushing upon this. It is a collection of Greek and possibly Roman and others. It's a collection of mathematicians and philosophers that are doing this. And the scene that they're showing in this is, again, Julius Caesar sitting down and doing all this work. And who's the one who's helping with all this work? Cleopatra. They really want to give her a lot more power and influence than she actually had, which, to be fair, she did. She did have power and influence. She did. But they're playing it up even more than historically what we can prove that she had. Like, they straight up say that the power dynamic between Rome and Egypt was flipped and that Cleopatra was making the calls. No! Anyway, moving on, they're going kind of back to Egypt and around. Julius Caesar ends up declaring himself to be dictator for the remainder of his life. And they talk about how the Roman Republic, or at least its establishment, is beginning to fear that Julius Caesar is going to want to become a king of Rome to Cleopatra's queen. And then Shelley goes and outright states again, these politicians are really concerned that Caesar is going to become an autocrat because of the influence of Cleopatra. No, that is not because of the influence of Cleopatra. They didn't like Cleopatra. They thought that it was bad. Caesar pretty much already was an autocrat at this point. The Senate has feared Caesar for years. There was already a civil war in Rome that was between Caesar and his rival Pompey. Pompey was the one that was being supported by the Senate in order to fight Caesar. The Senate for years has already feared the man and has tried bringing him down multiple times, but was never able to do so. They're not suddenly afraid that he's going to want to become king and do all of this because of Cleopatra. They were afraid of him doing that from the very beginning. You're giving her a lot more credit, Netflix, than what she actually did. If anything, she just made it worse. Anyway, next scene up, which I can't really show you, is, of course, this fear turns into actual death as Caesar gets killed in the Senate on the Ides of March, everyone around him stabbing him. Cleopatra is in the city and initially refuses to escape because she is looking for the will of Caesar, because she is hoping that her son, Caesarion, is going to be named as his heir, but that doesn't happen. What happens instead is that Caesar's great-nephew Octavian is designated as his heir, which makes sense. That's why it would be named. I don't understand over the course of this part of the episode why they're having Cleopatra be flabbergasted as to, what, but he does have a son. What do you mean? Why would the inheritance go to someone else? Why would my son not get it? He is the legitimate son of Caesar. Except no, he wasn't. Yes, Caesarion was the son of Julius Caesar, and I don't know why they're phrasing it this way in the documentary, but he was not the legitimate son of Julius Caesar. Not only was he born by parents that were not married, but Julius Caesar was already married to a Roman woman, and Cleopatra was a foreign queen. It is exceptionally unlikely that anyone within the Senate would have ever supported something like that. Her son was not the legitimate heir to Rome. He was a bastard. I don't understand why they had to phrase it this way. Again, Roman soldier, leather armor, what the hell is this? They then have to go back to Egypt where her son is growing up. She's not back in Rome here for a while. Her sister is plotting her escape and ultimate downfall, while simultaneously working with her other little brother, the one that she ended up having to marry after the other one drowned. Which, yes, at this point, Cleopatra did have to marry both of her little brothers, who she then more than likely ends up having to poison in order to seize power, because then she's able to elevate her son Caesarion to be the co-regent, the co-ruler, the pharaoh of Egypt. Everything then moves on to the scene in Rome here again, where a civil war has pretty much broken out between the conspirators who sought to kill Caesar and everyone else that is trying to punish the conspirators who killed him. Though simultaneously, the continuous scenes of showing all these Roman soldiers riding around on horseback fighting, I don't know why they're emphasizing the things with possibly the cavalry of Rome, because Rome is not famous for its cavalry. Like, if you're going to be showing the troops marching in formation, sure, but you just showed a melee brawl for Rome on horseback, which is not what you would typically see with Rome. The remainder of the episode goes on to how she tries to seek another alliance with Rome, this time going through Mark Antony, who she would summarily offer everything meaning wealth, that Egypt itself would back him. And simultaneously, she offers her physical self, her body. She is going to become his lover. And then afterwards, again, because this is Netflix, we have to get into the really smoky melodrama sexy scenes, which fills up the remainder of this episode. There really isn't much else to talk about. besides that. And we already know that they were lovers and were together for years. So, I mean, I can't really say anything on that. It's just Netflix doing Netflix things there at the end. Oh, right, and Arsinoe gets absolutely yeeted. But either way, that is the end of the second episode of Queen Cleopatra. Everyone, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and analysis of breakdown of the series. I will continue with the next 2 episodes, breaking down each thing that I'm able to identify in it that is wrong. And I hope that you join me for that as well. Thank you for all of your support from the previous video and helping for my channel to grow. If you could like, comment, subscribe, do anything you can to help the video in the algorithm, I would appreciate it. And until next time, I will see you all later. Goodbye, guys. Have a good rest of your day.